Welcome to Untold Stories, and settle in for tonight's journey. Tonight we'll walk through the jungle with a man who hid for decades. We'll drift upon the wide sea with sailors waiting for rescue. And we'll listen to the whispers of the great Congo forest. Let the stories unfold slowly, like a book read at night, carrying you toward rest. Please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel, and now close your eyes and relax your body. Now we move to the almost unbelievable story of a man who spent 28 years hidden in the jungle long after the war had ended. The year was 1944. The island of Guam was heavy with noise as war pressed close. Shoichi Yokoi, a young soldier from Japan, felt the ground shake with distant shells. He had been trained to fight, trained to obey, and trained above all, never to surrender. And yet, as he looked at the sky darkened by smoke, he knew he must slip away if he wanted to live. His heart beat firmly in his chest, not from anger, not from pride, but from something quieter, an instinct to survive. He carried little with him, a rifle that felt heavier with each step, a small bundle of belongings and the memory of orders that told him never to fall into the hands of the enemy. Around him, the voices of war were shouting, fading and breaking apart. He stepped away from them, turning instead toward the trees. The jungle opened in front of him like a wall of green. Leaves overlapped, vines hung down, and shadows stretched across the ground. Every step into that forest seemed to close the door on the world behind him. His boots pressed into soft earth, damp with rain, and above his head the canopy thickened until the sky itself seemed hidden. Birds called from unseen branches, their songs sharp and quick. Somewhere farther in, he heard the flutter of wings, and then silence again. The forest was alive but cautious, holding its breath as he entered. He paused for a moment, listening. Behind him, the sounds of gunfire were faint now, like echoes traveling across water. Ahead, there was only the rustle of leaves and the steady trickle of water nearby. Shoichi moved slowly, carefully, his eyes adjusting to the shifting light. Shafts of sunlight pushed their way through gaps in the canopy, marking little patches of gold on the ground. He followed the slope downward until he reached a small stream. The water ran clear, moving over stones, carrying with it a sound both steady and calming. He crouched there, dipping his hands into the cool current, letting it wash over his skin. For a moment, he felt torn. Part of him longed to turn back, to know what had become of his comrades, to hold on to the world he had known. But another part, stronger now, told him to stay hidden, to trust the forest. His commanders had said that capture was worse than death, and so, with quiet fear softening into resolve, he chose to trust the silence of the jungle instead of the noise of war. The air smelled of earth and leaves, rich and damp. He brushed past ferns taller than his waist, their fronds cool against his arms. A lizard darted across the ground, vanishing into the underbrush before he could follow it with his eyes. Every sound startled him at first, the crack of a branch, the distant call of a bird, but slowly, step by step, he began to walk more steadily. He carried his small tools with care, a knife tucked close, a length of cloth, a few other pieces he thought he might need. They were all he had, and they felt like fragile threads holding him together. Above, the green canopy closed again, a roof of leaves that seemed to shield him from the world outside. In that shelter he felt both hidden and small, as if the forest had swallowed him whole. Hours passed, though he could not measure them. The jungle had no clock, only the movement of light as the day slipped forward. Shadows deepened, then softened again, and with each change he pressed further inward. His footsteps grew quieter, more careful, as if the forest itself were teaching him how to walk without being noticed. Sometimes he stopped to listen. When he did, he heard the softest sounds: water flowing, insects buzzing, leaves shifting as the wind touched them. They became a kind of music, a rhythm slower than the world he had left behind. At first it made him uneasy, but after a while it steadied him, reminding him that life here had its own pace. When evening drew near, the air cooled. The calls of the birds grew fewer, replaced by the faint beginning of crickets. Shoichi found a place where the trees grew close together, their roots twisting like the walls of a small room. He sat there, back against the trunk of a tree, and breathed deeply. His heart was still uneasy, but he told himself to wait, to endure. The jungle did not speak, but it surrounded him. The canopy above, the water trickling nearby, the weight of his tools, all were threads, pulling him into this new life. He closed his eyes for a moment and let the sound of the stream fill his ears. It was not the clash of battle. It was not the shouts of men. It was steady, calm, and endless. He thought of home, though he did not let the thought linger. The faces of family, the streets of his village, they seemed far away now, as if belonging to another time. Here there was only the thick air of Guam, the shadows of vines, and the knowledge that he must remain unseen. As the last light of the day sank through the trees, Shoichi remained still. He would not return. He would not surrender. Instead, he would wait here in the hush of the jungle, letting the green walls close around him. The war still raged beyond, but to him it was already fading. What remained was the forest, the night air cooling his skin, and the soft trickle of water threading through the silence. And so, with only the forest as company, his long life in hiding began. In the first days after stepping into the jungle, Shoichi moved carefully, almost like a guest who was unsure if he belonged. But days became weeks, and weeks became months, and he slowly began to shape a life from what the forest gave him. The green canopy above, which once felt like a curtain closing off the sky, became his ceiling. He looked up at it often. Sunlight slipped through its gaps, painting shifting patches on the ground, and rain tapped gently across its surface, falling in drops that glittered for a moment before soaking into the soil. That roof of leaves and branches was no longer just a cover. It was his shelter, his shield, and the space beneath it was his home. Shoichi's first need was simple: a place to rest. He studied the trees and the ground, moving slowly, searching for a spot that felt hidden but safe. Finally, he found a space between bamboo stalks, their tall stems leaning together as if already forming part of a wall. He bent them carefully, weaving them with other branches until they shaped a small shelter. The walls were thin, but when he spread leaves across them, they held. On the ground he layered ferns and palm fronds, soft enough to make a bed. When he lay down at night, the scent of earth rose around him, damp, rich, and grounding. The sound of the stream was not far away, steady as ever, and he let it fill his ears as he closed his eyes. It was not the bed he had once known. It was not the sound of voices in the barracks. But it was his, and in that small space he found a kind of safety. Food was the next need, and food meant learning. At first he tried what little he had carried, rationing carefully. But soon he had to look to the jungle. He searched the ground for roots, plucked wild plants, and tested them in small bites. Some were bitter, some sharp, some gentle enough to eat. He found fruits, too, tucked among the trees, bright against the green. He tasted them slowly, waiting to see how his body responded. He remembered the teachings from home, the lessons of survival and patience. Fire was not safe. Smoke could give away his hiding place, so he learned to chew slowly, to eat things raw or softened by time. Sometimes he found crabs near the water or small fish in the shallows. With his hands, with sharp sticks, and with his worn knife, he learned to catch them. The taste was plain, but it filled his stomach, and each meal taught him something new. His tools grew worn from use, the knife's handle smoothed from his grip, cloth frayed at the edges. Each small object felt precious, like a friend. He cared for them, sharpening, mending, storing them carefully when he slept. Without them, he knew, life would be far harder. Every day he listened. The forest had its own sounds, the rustle of animals in the undergrowth, the calls of birds, the whisper of wind in the branches. But beneath those sounds he was always alert for something different, the step of a human, the sudden crack of a rifle, voices that did not belong to the forest. Sometimes he thought he heard them, faint and far away. He would stop, hold his breath, and wait. Usually it was nothing more than the forest shifting. But the fear kept him still and the patience grew. In those first months he became quieter inside. Fear still lived in him, but it softened into something steadier, something close to discipline. Each action was slow, careful. Each choice was weighed. He moved only when he had to, keeping to shadows, walking near streams where his footsteps were softened by water. Nights were the hardest. Darkness in the jungle was thick, almost absolute. He lay on his bed of leaves, staring into blackness, listening as crickets sang and small creatures moved. The rustle of leaves in the breeze often calmed him, reminding him that the forest was alive, that it held him as it held everything else. In time, even the night began to feel less threatening, more like another rhythm of this new life. Days blurred together, marked only by small achievements, a sturdier wall on his shelter, a new way to tie branches, a root that could be eaten safely. Each success was quiet but real, and each one made the life he was building more certain. He began to know the forest paths, the places where the ground sloped, where water pooled after rain, where fruits ripened in clusters. He remembered them as if they were rooms in a house, returning when he needed them. He learned which sounds meant safety, which meant danger. He learned when to stay still and when to move. The green canopy above never left him. It was his ceiling in the morning when the sun filtered down, and at night when the stars were hidden. The stream was his companion, offering water to drink, water to wash his skin, and the steady music of its flow to steady his heart. His tools became his hands' extension, guiding his survival. Through it all, he never truly knew what was happening beyond the trees. Some days he thought he heard distant thunder, perhaps battle. Other days the world was silent, but for the forest itself. Without news, without certainty, he only knew one thing. To endure was to survive. So he endured. And as the war ended beyond the trees, Shoichi did not know. And so his quiet days stretched onward. Time moved differently in the jungle. Days were marked by light and shadow, by the sun rising above the canopy and then sinking again behind it. Months were marked by the rains that swept across the leaves and the dry spells that left the ground cracked and thirsty. And years passed almost without notice, measured only by the small changes Shoichi carried within himself. By the late 1940s, his life had become a rhythm, simple and steady. He woke with the first light, when the birds called out from the branches and the mist clung low to the ground. His shelter, once fragile, now stood like an old companion. The bamboo walls had aged and bent, patched many times with fresh stalks and leaves. The roof sagged here and there, but it still kept the rain from falling on him at night. His tools had also changed. The knife he had carried from the war was no longer sharp in the same way, but he had found stones to hone its edge. Its handle had grown smooth, molded to the curve of his palm after years of use. Clothing, too, had been patched and repatched. The fabric wore thin, but Shoichi learned to stitch together scraps with fibers pulled from plants. Nothing lasted forever, but everything could be shaped again with care. Food came through patience. Sometimes he caught small animals, sometimes fish from the stream. Other times he lived on roots, fruits and wild plants, the tastes familiar now, no longer strange. He had learned which plants filled him, which ones were dangerous, which ones gave him strength when he felt weak. His meals were never large, but they were enough. The seasons gave their own rhythm. In the rainy months, water poured from the sky, heavy and endless. The jungle floor turned soft and rivers swelled until they overflowed. Shoichi listened as the rain tapped on broad leaves, 1,000 gentle drums above him. Nights in the rain were cool, the air heavy with mist, and he would curl into his shelter, wrapped in what cloth he had, listening until sleep carried him away. In the dry months, the sun pressed down hard. The forest floor cracked and streams thinned. The air shimmered with heat, and Shoichi felt it deep in his bones. These were the harder times when food was less and water required walking farther. But the forest always gave something if he searched patiently, and he learned to endure the dryness as he endured the rain. Evenings were the gentlest part of his days. When the light faded and the forest softened into shadow, he often sat quietly outside his shelter. Sometimes he would light a small fire deep in the cave he had found, careful to keep its glow hidden. The firelight flickered across stone walls, painting them in warm colors that reminded him of lanterns back home. He would sit there in silence, warming his hands, watching the flames shift and bend. Nights brought the chorus of the forest. Crickets sang together, a steady background sound, their song rising and falling like waves. Other creatures called out too, frogs, owls, the rustle of small feet through fallen leaves. For Shoichi, these sounds became a lullaby. They told him he was not alone, even in his solitude. They wrapped him in a kind of comfort, steady and unchanging. Years slipped past like this, one after another, each carrying its own hardships, each carrying its own small gifts. His body grew leaner, his face lined, but his hands remained steady, his eyes watchful. He had become part of the forest's pattern, one more creature moving quietly beneath the trees. Sometimes, as he lay on his bed of leaves, Shoichi thought of the world beyond. He wondered if the war still raged, if the soldiers still marched. But with no news, no signs, he could not know. All he knew was survival and the rhythm of days. So he lived within it, year after year, the canopy above unchanged, the stream flowing as it always had, the crickets singing him to rest. His memories softened in the edges of time. Home felt far away, like a dream from another life. The voices of family, the streets of his village, the touch of familiar hands, all were blurred now, yet still carried warmth when he let himself remember. Sometimes he thought of walking back, of leaving the forest. But fear always returned, fear of discovery, fear of capture, fear of failing in his duty. And so he stayed. The forest became not just a hiding place, but his world. He knew its paths, its dangers, its gifts. He had grown old with it, though the world beyond had kept on changing without him. His shelter aged, his tools wore thin, but his patience only grew stronger. And so the years flowed on until decades had passed beneath the same steady trees. It was a quiet morning in January of 1972. The forest carried its usual sounds, the steady calls of birds, the rustle of branches, the hum of insects, but for Shoichi, that day would not be like the many thousands before it. He was walking a narrow path he had traced countless times, worn faint into the ground by his feet over the years. The grass bent softly beneath each step. The air was cool, touched by the season, and Shoichi carried himself with the same watchfulness he always had. His ears, long trained to notice the faintest change, caught something new. It was not the call of a bird, nor the crack of a branch under an animal. It was footsteps, human footsteps, a sound he had not heard in almost 3 decades. He froze, his heart tightening. The forest, which had been his safe companion, now felt alive with danger. He listened closely. The rhythm was clear, the sound of men moving slowly, carefully, but without the fear he himself carried. From the trees ahead, 2 figures appeared, local hunters moving through the jungle with practiced ease. Shoichi's breath caught. His first thought was not relief, but alarm. He had spent 28 years avoiding discovery, certain that capture meant failure, or worse. His body, lean and tired though it was, tensed with the instinct to resist. The hunters saw him too. For a moment, silence filled the space between them. Only the wind through the leaves moved. Shoichi's clothes were worn thin, patched with countless repairs. His hair and beard had grown wild. He looked like a figure pulled out of another time. To the hunters, it must have seemed like a ghost had stepped out of the forest. One man called out. The sound of his voice was startling, almost overwhelming. Shoichi had not heard another person speak in decades. The tone was not harsh. It was curious, even gentle, but the shock of it struck him deeply. His body reacted before his mind could catch up. He turned to flee. His feet pushed through the grass, carrying him with the same urgency he had felt so many years ago when he first ran into hiding. But he was no longer the young soldier of 1944. His body was thinner, his strength built for quiet endurance, not sudden bursts. The hunters caught up to him quickly. There was a struggle, short and clumsy. Shoichi's hands gripped with the desperation of a man who had survived by never letting himself be found. But the hunters did not strike him. They held him firmly, speaking words he barely understood through the fog of disbelief. Their voices carried calmness, not violence. Slowly, the fight left him. His breath came heavy, his eyes wide. He realized the men did not wish to harm him. They were trying to guide him, to speak to him, to bring him out from the shadows he had lived in for so long. Shoichi's heart beat fast, but his spirit softened. The voices around him, though strange after all these years, held no anger. Instead, they held something else, perhaps surprise, perhaps care. He let his shoulders drop, his hands fall. The footsteps came again. Not hidden, not threatening, but steady, guiding him. The grass bent softly beneath them as the men led him out from the place he had known as his entire world. Shoichi followed, each step heavy with disbelief. The jungle that had been his shield now felt like it was gently releasing him. The birds still called, the crickets still sang, the wind still whispered through the canopy, but now those sounds grew quieter in his mind as human voices took their place. Every sound of the men's steps reminded him that his long solitude was ending. It was a rhythm he had once feared more than anything, but now, after 28 years, he felt himself surrendering to it. Shoichi did not yet know what waited beyond the trees. He did not know how the world had changed, what years had carried forward without him. But in that moment, walking behind the hunters, the forest slowly fading into the background, he knew one truth. His time of hiding was over. And so after 28 years, Shoichi stepped out of the forest and into the wide eyes of the waiting world. When Shoichi Yokoi finally left the jungle behind, he stepped into a world that seemed almost like a dream. The year was 1972. 28 years had passed since he had last seen the familiar shores of his homeland. The first sights and sounds of the wider world amazed him. Trains rushed past with a thunder he had nearly forgotten, their wheels clicking in steady rhythm along the rails. Streets glowed with bright lights, and cars hummed through them as if the world had found a faster heartbeat in his absence. People gathered to see him, their voices filled not with anger, but with wonder. Shoichi bowed often, his movements quiet, humble, dignified. After so many years of silence, the greetings of strangers felt overwhelming, but also kind. The world that had once seemed dangerous now greeted him with warmth. He realized that he was no longer a soldier hiding in fear. He was a man returning home. In Japan, Shoichi began to live a quieter life. He spoke softly about his years in the forest, sharing how he had survived by weaving palm fibers into clothing, by catching shrimp in streams, by listening to the steady heartbeat of the jungle each night. People listened with wide eyes, moved not only by the struggle, but by the patience and strength that carried him through so many years alone. Crowds gathered to hear him, yet Shoichi never let pride grow too large in his heart. He spoke simply, always with respect. He reminded those who asked that survival had been his duty, his way of holding on to life when he believed the world beyond the trees no longer existed. Sometimes, when the lights of the city seemed too bright, his mind drifted back to the canopy of Guam. He remembered the rustle of leaves above his head, the trickle of water over stones, the song of crickets that had been his nightly companions. Even as he lived among rooftops and paved roads, he carried the hush of the jungle inside him, like a memory that never left. His life after the jungle was not one of fame, but of gentle dignity. He married, he lived quietly, and he accepted the kindness of those around him. People saw him not just as a soldier, but as a symbol of resilience, a man who had endured the weight of solitude and returned with humility. At times, Shoichi walked through busy streets and felt the hum of the city. At other times, he sat in his home, listening to the stillness. In that stillness, he could almost hear the faint hush of the wind passing through distant trees. It was as if the forest still whispered to him, reminding him of the years he had spent under its care. But now, instead of fear, those memories brought peace. He no longer listened for footsteps with dread. He no longer bent low at every sound. The jungle had once been his shield, but now it was simply part of his story, woven into who he was, carried with him wherever he went. Shoichi's life stretched on for many more years. He grew older, yet remained steady. People continued to remember his story not as one of darkness, but as one of light. They saw in him the truth that even in the loneliest places the human spirit could endure. And so, in the gentle rhythm of his later years, Shoichi found rest. His journey, once marked by shadows beneath the trees, had opened into a life of quiet acceptance. And so Shoichi's long journey, once hidden in shadows, became a story of light, carried softly into history. Now we move on to the story of the men from the USS Indianapolis who found themselves in the open sea after their ship was lost in 1945. It is a quiet telling of their days in the water, the sounds they heard, the feelings they held, and the moments that carried them toward rescue. The night was warm and still. The sea stretched wide and black, quiet under the stars. On board the USS Indianapolis, the men were at their posts or resting in their bunks, the ship carrying them steadily across the Pacific. Then, in a sudden flash, the stillness was broken. A thunderous strike shook the vessel. The sound was sharp, tearing, as if the very ocean had been ripped apart. For a breathless moment, no one could believe what had happened. And then another explosion followed, louder, closer. The ship groaned, shuddering under the force. Men were thrown from their hammocks. Others stumbled across the deck, hearts pounding. The familiar rhythm of the ship was gone, replaced by chaos. The smell of smoke rose into the night air, and the glow of fire touched the waves. Shoes were lost, helmets grabbed, voices shouting. Some called out orders, others called out names. Water rushed in below, flooding compartments faster than doors could be sealed. In the confusion, men realized what no one wanted to say aloud. The ship was not going to last. Within minutes, the great cruiser began to lean, tilting toward the dark water. The bow sank lower, and the stern lifted slightly, as if the sea itself were pulling it down. The ship's lights flickered once, twice, and then went dark. The men had no choice. They leapt into the black water, one after another. Some slid down ropes, others climbed over railings, many simply jumped, holding their breath until the sea swallowed them. The shock of the salt water was sharp, but it was life compared to the sinking steel. Behind them, the Indianapolis groaned again, louder than thunder. In the distance, the fire burned bright against the night for a few more seconds, then dimmed as the vessel disappeared beneath the waves. In less than 15 minutes, the proud ship was gone. Now there was only the ocean. The men surfaced one by one, coughing and gasping, kicking hard to stay afloat. Life jackets kept many above water, but some clutched on to debris or rafts that had been tossed clear. All around them were faint splashes, the sound of hundreds of bodies landing in the sea. It was hard to see. The night was heavy, the moon hidden, but the voices told them they were not alone. Calls rose in every direction, names shouted, questions asked, prayers whispered. "Over here!" one man cried. "I'm with you," another answered back. "Hold on!" The voices travelled across the dark water, carrying reassurance through the night. Men swam toward each other, forming small clusters. In the vast ocean, no one wanted to drift alone. The waves moved slowly, lifting and lowering them like a cradle. The motion was steady, endless. In that rhythm, some found calm. They listened to the water's gentle hiss, the soft rise and fall. It reminded them that the sea was alive but not cruel. It would carry them if they let it. The fire that had once burned on the surface faded away, leaving only shadows. Bits of debris floated nearby, planks, boxes, small scraps of the ship. A few men clung to them for support, others shared their life vests tying together with ropes to keep close. The shock of what had happened sat heavy in every chest. Just hours ago they had been sailors aboard a strong ship. Now they were survivors, drifting in an endless sea. The thought was too large to hold all at once, so they focused on smaller things, keeping heads above water, staying close, answering voices in the dark. "Here," someone said softly, guiding another man closer. "We'll stick together," came the reply. There was no time to ask how long they might wait, or when help would come. For now, all they could do was stay afloat, stay calm, and breathe with the sea. The night stretched on. Stars appeared between thin clouds. Every so often, a piece of wood would bump against someone, startling them, before being pushed gently away by the waves. Some men whispered quietly to steady themselves. Others prayed, lips moving in the darkness. A few simply listened, to the breathing of those beside them, to the splash of the sea against their ears, to the steady lift and fall of the ocean that carried them together. The shock of the sinking began to soften into a quieter resolve. They had survived the first terrible minutes. Now they had to last through the long night. Time was hard to measure in the open sea. Seconds felt like minutes, minutes like hours. Yet still, the water moved in the same slow rhythm, and the voices rose now and then, reminding each man that others were near. "Stay with me," one voice murmured. "I'm not going anywhere," came the tired answer. The sea itself seemed to breathe with them. A gentle swell lifted, then lowered over and over, as though it too was watching over them. At last, the dark sky began to shift. Far off, a faint grey touched the horizon. The men noticed it slowly one by one until a quiet murmur spread among them. Dawn's coming. The promise of light gave them strength. For hours they had floated in darkness, not knowing what would come. Now the sea began to reveal its face again. Slowly, shadows became outlines, the curve of a shoulder, the tilt of a life jacket, the ripple of a wave. The sun had not yet risen, but its approach was enough to steady their hearts. They were not alone in the endless black anymore, and so the survivors breathed a little easier. The shock of the night had passed. Their voices grew calmer, their movements slower. They floated together, listening to the water's soft rhythm. The steady sound of waves became their comfort, a reminder that time was still moving, carrying them forward. And so, as night turned slowly toward morning, the men began their first long day in the water. The horizon was no longer black. After hours of floating in darkness, the men could finally see a thin band of grey stretching across the edge of the sea. It was faint at first, a soft smudge between water and sky. Slowly it widened, deepening into pale silver. The first hints of morning had come. The men lifted their heads as best they could, eyes straining to watch. The long night had been filled with shadows, broken only by the sound of waves and the murmurs of nearby voices. Now there was something to look toward. Dawn was rising. The sea around them caught the faint light, turning from black to dark blue. Shapes became visible. A face here, an arm there, the the rounded edge of a life jacket bobbing in the water. Men realized just how many were near. Small clusters had formed through the night, voices drawing them together, rope and courage keeping them close. They called to one another again, voices steadier now that they could see. "Over here," someone said, his tone calm, not desperate. "Form a circle," another answered. "Stay close, we'll watch out for each other." The slow light revealed the survivors, not just voices in the dark anymore, but men gathered together, their faces pale and wet, their eyes tired yet awake. The sea cradled them in its steady rhythm, lifting and lowering them in time with its gentle breath. And then the sun broke the horizon. A golden edge appeared, soft and glowing, painting the waves in shimmering streaks. The night's chill seemed to lift, replaced by faint warmth, brushing their faces. Salt clung to their lips and skin, but the light of the sun gave them something new. The sense that the world was still turning, that morning still came, even here. Some men closed their eyes, letting the glow touch their eyelids. Others looked upward, marveling at how wide the sky seemed, now that they had no ship above them, only open air. The clouds were thin and far away, streaked with the same pale gold. For the first time since the ship had gone down, there was something beautiful to hold in their minds. As daylight spread, the survivors began to take stock of what they had. A few small rafts had floated free from the wreck, and those nearby clung to them. Some carried a little water or rations. Most men had only the clothes they wore, life jackets strapped tight across their chests. The salt stung their skin, and the taste of it was sharp in their mouths. They spat into the sea, but the taste lingered. Still no one complained loudly. They knew they had to save their strength. The groups tightened together, forming rings of men who could keep an eye on one another. A hand on a shoulder, a rope. Tied between vests, a few words shared. Small things that steadied them. In the vastness of the ocean, closeness mattered more than anything. They spoke softly about what had happened, but never for long. The past hours were too heavy to carry. Instead, they talked of the morning, of the sun climbing higher, of the wide sky above them. Each sentence was simple, just enough to remind one another that they were still here, still together. "Feels warmer now," a sailor said. "Daylight makes it easier," came the reply. "We'll see each other through this." The men let the ocean move them, rising and falling with each swell. The motion was endless, but not harsh. It was as though the sea itself was breathing around them, steady and slow. In that rhythm they found a kind of patience. Hours passed, gently. The sun rose higher, spilling light across the water. The waves glittered under daylight, bright points dancing on the surface like stars come down from the night. The men watched the glimmers as they moved, sometimes dazzled, sometimes soothed by the way the light shifted and sparkled. The hush of the sea became softer under the sun, less like a secret and more like a steady companion. Every breath of wind, every lap of wave seemed to carry the same quiet message. Keep floating, keep waiting. Some men closed their eyes, letting the warmth of the sun touch their faces, drifting in the sound of water around them. Others watched the horizon, calm but alert, as if searching for shapes that might bring help. There was no hurry, only patience. As the day stretched on, the groups of survivors learned to move with the water, to rest when they could, to share strength with one another. They passed small pieces of debris between them, making use of what floated nearby. They encouraged each other in low voices. It was not a loud day. It was a quiet one, filled with the sound of water glimmering under sunlight and the murmur of men speaking gently to keep spirits steady. Hope did not arrive in sudden bursts. It came slowly, like the sun rising inch by inch over the sea. With each hour of daylight, the survivors grew a little more certain that they could last. They had made it through the night. They could make it through the day. By afternoon, the sky was wide and endless. Clouds drifted lazily, pale and harmless. The water shimmered, light scattering across it in soft, rhythmic flashes. Men watched, those glimmers as though they were watching a clock, each sparkle another tick of time moving forward. The salt still clung to them. Their lips cracked, their eyes stung, but they stayed together. They found calm in the simple truth that morning had turned to day, and day was carrying them onward. Even as the sun began to dip lower, its warmth fading into softer gold, the survivors held on to the feeling that light would always return. The ocean had not taken that from them. As the first day gave way to night again, the sea grew wide and quiet once more. The second day began much like the first. Water stretching in every direction, sky above without end. By now the men had grown used to the steady rhythm of the waves. The sea lifted them, then lowered them, again and again, a motion so constant it seemed to breathe for them. It was no longer strange. It was simply the way the world moved now. The men floated in small groups, held together by rope, by hands, by the quiet strength of staying close. The creak of life jackets sounded whenever a body shifted, a soft reminder that each person was still there. Some spoke now and then, voices low and calm. Others kept silent, eyes fixed on the horizon, saving their strength. The sun rose once more, turning the water gold, then white, then a deep, clear blue. With it came the warmth of morning, gentle and familiar. For a while, the men let it rest on their faces as though it could fill them with new energy. They remembered the glow of that first dawn, how it had lifted their spirit, and they carried that memory like a quiet flame inside. The hours passed slowly. The sea was calm but endless, stretching out in every direction. The sound of waves, lapping against one another, became part of the background, joined by the low hum of wind moving across open water. That sound was steady, almost soothing, a reminder that the world carried on, even here. The men drifted. Some looked at the sky, watching clouds form and fade. Some watched the water, noting the way it changed from turquoise in the sun to deep blue when the shadows stretched. A few closed their eyes, not to sleep fully, but to rest, letting the steady rhythm of the sea cradle them. In the quiet, small moments stood out. A gentle word passed between two men, a hand squeezing another's shoulder, a laugh, soft and short, but real, when someone told a simple memory of home. These little things kept them steady, like threads of light across a wide ocean. By the third day, the rhythm of waiting had become a kind of pattern. Morning light, midday sun, long hours of drifting, the coolness of night. Time felt both endless and slow, but the men endured it together. The voices were fewer now, but stronger when they came. No one wasted words. Each sentence mattered. They encouraged each other with simple lines. Stay with me. Hold on. We're still here. The water rocked them gently, always the same. The sound of it no longer felt strange or frightening. It was part of them now, like breathing. The sea's voice became their companion, its endless hush wrapping around them with each swell. The sky became their clock. They watched it carefully as the sun rose, arched, and fell each day. In the morning, the colors were soft and pale. At noon, they were bright and sharp, the sun blazing high. By evening, the light turned golden again, softening across the waves. Each change reminded them that time was moving forward. The sea shifted too, its colors deepened and brightened, always alive, always moving. Sometimes the water was calm and glassy. Other times, faint breezes stirred it, small ripples running across its surface. The men felt these breezes on their skin, cool against the heat of the sun. Each brush of air was a quiet comfort, another thread of endurance in their long wait. Though hours stretched on, the men carried themselves with quiet strength. They did not cry out, they did not thrash against the sea. Instead, they stayed steady, floating in silence or speaking when needed. Their strength was not loud, but gentle, measured in patience, in the way they kept watch for one another, in the way they shared the memory of that first dawn. One man hummed softly, a tune half remembered, carried just loud enough for those near him to hear. Another whispered about home, about fields and quiet streets, the sound of leaves in summer. The men listened without interrupting. The words were simple, but they carried warmth. The sea accepted every sound, folding it into its endless hush. The waves and wind answered in their own rhythm, calm and low. On the third afternoon, the men watched as the light dimmed once more. The sun lowered itself toward the edge of the sea, painting the water in wide strokes of red and gold. The horizon glowed, and the men floated within it, small figures against the vastness. The breeze grew cooler, brushing their cheeks, carrying the low hum of open water once again. They let that sound settle into them, steady and slow. And so another night came, and still they floated, waiting for a sign beyond the horizon. The fourth morning rose gently, as the others had before it. The men floated in the wide sea, their bodies weary, their thoughts slow, but still they endured. The sun climbed, the waves rolled steady beneath them, and the sky stretched open, endless and blue. They had grown used to this rhythm. Each day had followed the same path, light, then dark, then light again, yet something inside them still held on, waiting for a change, waiting for a sign that the world beyond the horizon had not forgotten them. It came quietly at first, a faint sound almost hidden within the hush of the wind and the water. The men lifted their heads unsure. The waves lapped as they always did. The breeze whispered as before. But beneath those steady sounds, something new stirred. A distant hum, soft and low, drifting through the air. Eyes searched the sky. At first, there was only brightness, a glare of sun that made them squint and blink. Then, just for a moment, a glint, small and sharp, caught in the blue above. A plane. At once, voices that had been quiet for so long rose up again. "There!" someone shouted, the word breaking through the stillness. Arms splashed, hands lifted, men waving with all the strength they had left. The sea that had carried their silence now carried their cries of hope. The sound grew clearer. The hum of engines, steady and sure, rolled across the sky. The men's disbelief held them for a heartbeat, then slowly softened into something brighter. Relief. The thought that they had been seen, that the long days might finally end, filled them with energy they had not felt in hours, in days. They waved harder, voices calling, water splashing around them. The quiet sea, once their only companion, was alive now with motion and sound. Each shout was carried by the wind, each gesture stretched toward the sky. The plane circled, tilting its wings as if to answer. That small movement sent a rush of warmth through the men, stronger than the sun, stronger than the sea. They had been found. The waves rocked them gently as before, but the feeling had changed. Where once the steady water had been a reminder of waiting, now it became a bridge, carrying them closer to rescue. The voices, which had first called out in the dark nights after the sinking, now rose again, not in fear, but in joy. The men held on to one another, their small groups gathered tighter. Some whispered prayers, some laughed, the sound light and almost unbelieving. Others wept quietly, their tears lost to the salt of the sea. All felt the same breath of hope fill their lungs. Above them, the engines hummed steadily. That sound, strong and even, was different from the hush of the wind and waves. It was the sound of rescue, of connection, of life reaching out across the vast distance of the ocean. As the plane moved on to send word, the men settled into a new kind of waiting. This time, it was not endless. It had a shape, a direction, a promise. They could still hear the hum in the distance, fading but steady. They knew help would come. The sea quieted again, its wide surface broken only by the soft splashes of men adjusting in the water. The sun lowered slowly toward afternoon, painting the waves in warm light. But now, every shimmer on the surface seemed brighter. Every sound in the sky seemed nearer. They had endured through long nights, through silence and uncertainty. Now, with the sight of that small glint in the sky, everything had changed, and as the sound of planes and boats drew closer, the long days of drifting finally began to end. The rescue had come at last. Boats drew near, pulling the men gently from the water, lifting them from the waves that had held them for so many days. Strong hands reached down, steady voices guided them, and slowly the survivors rose out of the sea that had been both their cradle and their trial. The shift was almost too much to take in at once. For days the world had been only water and sky, only the endless blue horizon. Now there was wood beneath their fingers, rope at their sides, and the solid shape of a deck underfoot. Their legs trembled with the strange feel of firmness again, and many simply sat where they were placed, breathing slowly, letting the change sink in. The smell of food drifted across the deck. It was simple food, warm and plain, but to men who had known only salt water and hunger, it was a feast. A cup of broth, a piece of bread. Each taste was enough to bring tears. They ate slowly, some with eyes closed, as if not to wake from a dream. Voices surrounded them, the voices of rescuers calling to one another, checking names, offering water and comfort. The survivors, once scattered across miles of sea, now gathered together again. They heard each other more clearly now, no longer across the dark waves, but close, side by side. There was no need for many words, a look, a nod, a hand resting on another's shoulder. These spoke more than sentences. They were home, not in place yet, but in safety. In the days that followed, the men touched land again. Solid earth beneath their feet felt strange after so long afloat. Some walked carefully, steadying themselves as if the ground might shift. Others stood still, letting the quiet weight of it sink through their bodies. The air smelled different, too. Not just salt and sun, but the smell of earth, of grass, of cooking fires. These scents wrapped around them like blankets, reminders that the world was larger than the sea that had once seemed endless. At night, They rested on beds, real beds with sheets and pillows. The softness felt almost unreal. For nights, they had floated beneath the stars, rocking with the waves. Now the stillness of land, the silence of safe rooms, allowed them to close their eyes in peace, and yet the sea never fully left them. In quiet moments, they remembered the steady roll of the water, the sound of voices calling in the night, the first glimmer of dawn that had guided them through. These memories were carried gently, not as burdens, but as reminders of what they had endured together. The waves, once endless, now became stories. The voices, once scattered, now became a chorus of survivors. Each man held his own memory, but together they carried a single truth, that they had endured and they had been found. Some spoke of the experience in quiet words. They told of the darkness, the waiting, the sudden joy of seeing a plane above. Others kept their memories close, sharing them only with those who had been there. In every telling, there was the same thread, not of fear, but of strength, of patience, of holding on when the sea seemed too wide. And in time, the memories softened. The sharp edges of those long days faded into gentler shapes. The hush of the waves, once endless and heavy, now rested softly in their minds, like the memory of a lullaby, carrying them not into worry, but into calm. Years would pass, and the survivors would live their lives in different places, with families and friends, with work and quiet joys. But somewhere within each of them was the sea, the steady waves, the voices of their brothers, the sight of the sky opening at dawn. And so their long drift across the water ended, carried safely into memory, like waves resting on a quiet shore. And then we journey into the vast green mystery of the Congo, where explorers once entered the forest, never to return. The year was the early 1900s, a time when much of the world had already been charted on maps. But the Congo rainforest still held its secrets. Adventurers from faraway lands, carrying journals, compasses, and hopes of discovery, stepped into this vast, living wilderness. Their boots pressed softly into damp ground, the earth springing gently beneath them with every step. Above their heads stretched trees so tall that their crowns seemed to touch the sky. Sunlight slipped through the leaves in thin beams, falling like threads of gold across the forest floor. The air was heavy, rich with the scent of damp soil and green life. The explorers paused often, not out of weariness, but because of the immensity around them. Every tree trunk was thick, each vine wound tightly as though it had been growing for centuries, without pause. When they breathed, it was as though they inhaled the very heart of the earth. The soundscape was never empty. From high branches came the distant calls of birds, some sharp, some soft, echoing from unseen perches. Insects hummed in low patterns, weaving their own quiet songs beneath the canopy. And through it all was the sound that seemed to never end. The soft patter of rain on leaves, a rhythm that became part of each step, each breath. They carried packs, filled with simple supplies, water flasks, dried food, notebooks, and a few tools. Yet here, surrounded by the enormity of the forest, those items felt small, almost fragile. One man held his compass in his palm, glancing at it with care, though he soon realized the forest would be its own guide. The river at their side moved gently, winding like a silver ribbon through the green. It whispered softly as it flowed, a companion to their journey. The adventurers spoke in quiet voices, careful not to disturb the great stillness of the place. Each word felt as though it might echo forever. Their conversations were filled with wonder. Remarks about the size of the trees, the endlessness of the canopy overhead, the way the earth seemed to breathe beneath their feet. One of them reached out to touch the bark of a towering trunk. It was rough beneath his fingers, cool from the shade. Another paused to scoop water from the river into his flask, listening as droplets fell back with gentle splashes. The forest was alive in every detail, and they began to see it not as an obstacle, but as a vast world waiting to be understood. There was caution too, quiet and steady. Every rustle in the undergrowth reminded them that they were not alone. Eyes might be, watching, though none were seen. The forest carried its own presence, strong and undeniable. Yet it was not unwelcoming. It simply stood, ancient and patient, as though it had always been there and always would be. When night began to fall, the explorers found a small clearing near the river. They laid their packs on the ground, spreading cloths to keep their belongings dry. The air cooled slightly, though the earth still held warmth. Above, the canopy shifted colors, green, fading into shades of deep gray as the sky darkened. They gathered wood and built a small fire, the flames rising with crackles that echoed against the stillness. The glow reached only a little distance before being swallowed by the trees. Around them the bird calls gave way to crickets, their steady rhythm filling the air. The men sat close together, the firelight flickering on their tired yet eager faces. One of them opened his notebook, writing by the dim light of the flames. He described the trees, the river, the rain that had fallen steadily through the day. His words were not about conquest, but about wonder, the feeling of stepping into a world that felt both immense and eternal. As they settled for the night, the soft patter of rain returned, gentle and soothing as it tapped against the leaves. It was a lullaby written by the forest itself, wrapping around them with steady calm. Some drifted to sleep with their heads against their packs. Others gazed upward, watching shadows shift in the canopy. In that quiet moment, the forest became both home and mystery. It was a place that held them in its vast arms, steady and unhurried. Every detail, the smell of earth, the calls of unseen birds, the trickle of water, the endless green above, was etched into memory. And so, deeper they went, each step carrying them further into the heart of the green world. The first days had passed in awe, but soon the weeks began to stretch, each one carried forward by the steady rhythm of the forest. The adventurers moved carefully, step by step, learning how to live beneath the endless green roof above them. Every morning they woke to the soft light that filtered through the trees, never strong, never bright, but always present in quiet beams. The canopy was like a vast ceiling, high and unbroken, its branches weaving together into a living sky. Sometimes, when the breeze stirred, the leaves shifted and let the sunlight shimmer through in rippling patches. Other times, the rain returned, steady and familiar, tapping down onto the wide leaves and dripping slowly to the ground. The river had become their closest companion. It wound forward with patience, silver in the daylight, dark in the evenings. They learned to travel upon it. In small canoes they had brought and carefully shaped. Each stroke of the paddle sent ripples across the calm surface. The water carried them deeper into the forest, its quiet bends guiding their way when the land felt too thick to cross. They spoke little while gliding across the river, their voices hushed as if the forest itself listened. The only sounds were the dip of paddles, the gentle splash as they rose again, and the birds calling from hidden branches above. The men leaned forward, watching the flow, their faces calm with determination. They did not know how far they would go or when the forest would end, but they kept moving, patient in their progress. At night, when they stopped to rest, they built small fires. The smoke curled upward in thin streams, blending into the trees, until it disappeared. Around the fire, they dried their clothes and warmed their hands. The flames crackled softly, steady and soothing, becoming part of the rhythm of their nights. The forest's chorus of insects sang in the background, joined now by the low hum of the fire's voice. Their camps were simple. A few tarps stretched. Between branches, bedrolls laid on the earth, supplies carefully stacked. The ground was always soft with dampness, but they learned where to step, how to lift stones or branches to find drier places. Their lives became a series of small actions, setting a pot on the fire, tying rope between trees, marking the path they had taken. Each task was done slowly, with care, never hurried. They carried with them tools to leave signs along the way, a carved notch on a tree, a mark on a map in their journals. Each mark was like a whisper, a reminder of where they had been. Yet, as the weeks passed, they began to see that the forest had no clear end. Every bend in the river revealed more trees, more vines, more stretches of green that looked just like the day before, and still they pressed on. Determination guided them, patient and quiet. Some nights they would look upward, trying to glimpse the stars through the canopy. Often, only a few faint glimmers appeared far above the leaves, but even that was enough to remind them of the world beyond. The forest might seem endless, but they knew there was always more waiting beyond its edge. The rain was a constant friend, now. It came in light showers or long, steady drizzles, soaking their shoulders as they paddled, tapping gently against their shelters at night. At first it had been startling, but now it became part of their days, a familiar presence that cooled the air and washed the leaves clean. One evening they sat together around their small fire, their clothes drying on branches nearby. The smoke rose into the canopy, curling softly, the flames glowing orange against the dark. One man spoke, almost in a whisper, saying how the forest felt like a sea without end. The others nodded quietly, each of them knowing the truth of his words. Yet none of them spoke of turning back. The journey itself had become their reason, each day a step into the unknown. The forest was not unkind. It was simply vast, steady, and unhurried. The explorers learned to match that rhythm. Their patience grew with every paddle stroke, every mark on a tree, every spark of fire at night. They became part of the forest, not strangers to it, but quiet companions passing through. And so the weeks stretched, the canopy above them never ending, the river winding on, the rain falling with gentle constancy. Their determination did not waver, for they had learned the forest's lesson, to move slowly, with care, and to keep going, no matter how wide the green world seemed. And as the forest stretched on without end, they learned to move with its rhythm, day after day. In the years that followed, new groups came to the forest. They carried maps, notebooks, and hopes of reaching places others had not. Some followed the rivers. Some walked deep beneath the canopy, where sunlight was no more than a dim glow. Each of them stepped forward with the same quiet determination, their voices low, their movements steady. Yet not all of them returned. The forest, vast and patient, seemed to close behind those who entered. Paths that were once clear grew over with vines. Footprints faded when the rain fell, softening the ground until there was no trace at all. The canopy above swayed gently as if nothing had passed beneath it. What remained were fragments, torn, pages of journals damp and smudged, telling in short lines what the explorers had seen. A sketch of the river's bend, a note about a strange bird call at dusk, a sentence left unfinished, the ink blurred by water. These small pieces were found later by others, and they became the only voices of those who had gone missing. Maps. 2 were left behind, faded lines drawn by careful hands, arrows pointing toward places no one could confirm. Some maps ended suddenly, as if the journey had stopped mid-thought. The paper carried the faint smell of smoke, as though it had once been kept near a fire. Even the camps told stories. A circle of stones where a fire once burned. Bits of rope tied to trees now frayed and hanging loose. The faint shape of a shelter pressed into the earth, already softened by the steady fall of rain. The forest did not erase these things quickly, but it covered them gently, folding them back into itself. Those who searched later spoke softly of these signs. They touched the journals with care, held the maps in their hands, and wondered what had happened. They saw the marks of human presence, then looked up at the endless trees, the quiet rivers, the drifting mist. The forest gave no answers. It was not cruel. It was only vast, only steady, only unending. The explorers who vanished had simply become part of it, their footsteps blending into the sound of wind moving through tall grass, their voices fading into the hush of leaves. There was sorrow in this, but not sharp sorrow. It was gentle, like the slow closing of a book. Their stories did not end in noise or alarm, but in quiet, in the soft passing of time. The pages they left behind were like whispers, carried on the breeze, reminding others that they had once walked there. And so their journeys became memories. People spoke of them in low voices, of the maps without destinations, the notebooks with blurred words, the camps where no one remained. These fragments were gathered, kept safe, and remembered. They were not forgotten, for even in silence the forest held their traces. At night, when travellers sat by their fires, they sometimes thought of those who had disappeared. The smoke curled upward, just as it had in those lost camps, blending into the canopy and vanishing. They listened to the hush of the forest and imagined the footsteps of those before them, the steady rhythm of paddles on the river, the soft murmur of voices in the dark. But the forest did not reveal what it held. It remained quiet, endless and green, its rivers winding on, its canopy stretching overhead. Only the faint traces lingered, journals, maps and memories, gentle reminders of the ones who had come and gone. And in the hush of the forest, their stories lingered like whispers among the trees. In time, the stories of the lost adventurers spread beyond the trails and the rivers. They were carried by travellers who passed through the small villages scattered along the forest's edge. They were spoken of by families who had lived beside the Congo for generations, watching strangers arrive with maps and supplies, only to watch the forest swallow them whole. By evening, when the work of the day was done, people gathered by the fire. The flames flickered against the dark, sending soft light onto faces and walls. Children sat close, listening. Elders spoke slowly, their voices low and steady. The fire cracked and popped, its sparks drifting upward, vanishing into the canopy above. They spoke of the explorers with respect. They did not laugh at their mistakes or dismiss their courage. Instead, they remembered the way those men had set out, following rivers, cutting paths, carrying notebooks and maps. The villagers knew how difficult the forest was, how it could mislead even those born beside it. They spoke of the endless rain, the canopy that closed out the sun, the rivers that both guided and concealed. Some said the adventurers became part of the forest, walking still beneath the trees, unseen but not entirely gone. Others believed their spirits rested with the rivers, drifting onward with the current, carried far beyond the reach of their own footsteps. Travelers, too, added their voices. Passing through, they brought news of maps found, of journals discovered. With blurred words, they spoke of camps abandoned, fires gone out, and shelters swallowed back by vines. They told these things gently, as if each word was a thread tying the vanished back into the world of the living. Drums sometimes played in the background, their rhythm soft and steady. The sound carried into the night, echoing through the forest's edge. The music did not feel mournful. It was slow, respectful, a way of remembering. The steady beat blended with the crackle of fire and the hum of insects beyond the village walls. The children listened wide-eyed, imagining the endless green, the towering trees, the rivers that seemed to go on forever. To them, the forest was both near and far, near enough to touch, but far enough to feel like another world. The stories planted quiet wonder in their minds, and also respect. For the villagers, these tales were not warnings alone, they were reminders. The forest was vast, older than any map, stronger than any plan. Those who entered needed more than courage. They needed patience, humility, and trust in the land itself. So the stories were told again and again. They grew into memory, each retelling polishing the details until they shone. The rain was always there, steady on the leaves. The canopy was always described as a roof that hid both light and secrets. The rivers were always spoken of as paths that led forward, but also circled back. The forest, in these stories, was not an enemy. It was simply itself, endless, steady, alive. Those who vanished were remembered not with fear, but with calm voices, their journeys folded into the rhythm of village life. By firelight, faces glowed and shadows danced. Voices blended with the soft crackle of wood and the gentle sounds of night, the hum of insects, the distant call of an owl, the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. Together, it was as if the night itself leaned in to listen. The stories lingered. Long after the flames sank low, even as the fire became embers, the memories remained warm. The forest kept its silence, but the villagers kept their voices. In this way, the lost were not entirely lost. They were carried forward in the words of those who lived at the forest's edge, spoken softly under the stars. And so the forest became not only a place of journeys, but also a place of memory, held in the voices of those who lived beside it. Today the Congo rainforest still stretches wide across the heart of Africa. It is as if time has only deepened its roots, letting trees rise even taller, rivers flow even longer, and the air hold its quiet, steady rhythm. To stand at its edge is to see a green sea rolling out to the horizon, a canopy so vast that it seems without end. The rain still falls just as it always has. Sometimes it comes soft, a mist drifting down through the leaves. Other times it is steady and strong, a curtain that darkens the world and cools the earth. And always, when it passes, the ground glistens, the rivers swell, and the songs of birds and insects begin again. Those who once entered the forest long ago are not forgotten. Though their footsteps have faded, though their voices are silent, their memory lingers. The canopy that shielded them, the rivers that carried them, and the rain that softened their path still remain. It is as if the land itself holds their presence quietly, without needing to speak. Travelers today may still feel the weight of that history. To glide along a river's curve is to know others once followed the same path. To walk beneath the endless roof of trees is to imagine the faces that once looked upward, searching for the same light. The forest does not show where they went or why they vanished, but it carries them in silence as part of its story. And in the villages nearby, the voices of the past still echo. Children grow up hearing tales told by firelight. Elders still describe the canopy as a roof of mystery, the rain as a song that never ends, the rivers as paths that both guide and conceal. In this way, the lost are remembered not in sorrow alone, but in gentle wonder woven into the living rhythm of the land. The forest has endured for centuries. It will endure for centuries more. Its leaves still sway with the wind. Its rivers still sparkle beneath the sun. Its rain still hushes the air with a timeless sound, soft and steady, calming to anyone who listens. For those who pause to see it, the Congo remains not only a place of life, but also a place of memory. The explorers who entered are part of it now, their stories carried quietly through time, like whispers woven into the rustle of leaves. And so, these stories find their rest, threads of jungle, ocean, and forest woven softly into memory. May their quiet strength stay with you as you close your eyes. Sleep well, and let the hush of history carry you into peaceful dreams.